Yo, what is going on, homies? It's your boy Stumped back for another Optc video, and in today's video, we're hopping into a little bit of a tier list video. We're going to be talking about the 6+ characters that are available on Optc Global and Japan, and sort of ranking them on a tier to sort of give you guys an idea of which ones are worth doing and which ones aren't. So, in today's tier list, I want to make note that this is just my personal opinion from using these characters. I'm seeing all of them super awaken like throughout their time as well, and how useful they are as of April 2021. So, big shout out to Optc tier list and the database for the images and the tier list. The links will be in the description if you guys want to make your own tier list as well. I'm going to try and make this as short as sweet. If the characters go into don't bother or isn't overly useful, I am going to try and move through them very, very quickly, as PvP worthy, solid buff, and master, the ones that you sort of want to be looking at doing. Master especially. PvP worthy is very up to you, depending on what you have in your box and what you're running in PvP. And then solid buff is kind of like, well, they're good, but there are other characters that can do what they do. So it's really at the point where, like, you could use them, but it's up to you if you want to. It's mainly like if you don't have, like, if you have time or you have the resources to do them. But the must character, that's the one you guys really want to focus on, as those characters are used very, very often, or get such a significant buff that they just makes them so much better. So let's hop over to our tier list now. Alright, let's start. So OG Whitebeard is actually pretty good in Rumble. He does like a 50% HP cut on a very low cooldown. Other than that, he doesn't get too much. I think he gains like special charge on his special, and he removes block orbs but doesn't make him matching. So if you are doing this guy, you're pretty much only using him in Rumble. So that's the big upside to this guy. The HP cut's very, very nice. Boa, don't even bother. Honestly, like, she's never been good. She's got a good support, but her support doesn't change when you super awaken her, so there's that. Sabo probably isn't very useful. He's a free spirit booster though, so he can see play, but there's just rare recruits to do what he does, but better. This Usopp gets a solid buff. He changes drastically. He's a guaranteed delay booster, which is very, very good if you are in Kizuna and you want to get a conditional buff. This is pretty much the only way to do it besides, like, super type Katakuri. Partnering him up with the OG Katakuri, you can get a 2x conditional boost with him and that Katakuri. So he does get a solid buff. So I would recommend trying to keep one of each Usopp though, because the original Usopp can do up to a 5-turn delay. This guy can still do 3 turns if they're not immune to delay, but otherwise it's not overly essential to be doing this guy. Same with this Luffy. This Luffy does get a solid buff, mainly because he becomes a fighter character. He loses the free spirit captain tag, but he becomes a much better fighter captain. Unfortunately though, after 3 turns after using his special, he does like nerf himself significantly. But once upon a time, this guy was a goat, so he does get a solid buff. He does have a very good support though as well, so there also is that. But I actually prefer the time skip version of him actually a lot more. Rayleigh. Rayleigh's a must. Goes from a 5-turn bind reducer to a 7-turn bind paralysis and despair removal. He has a sailor ability that reduces his cooldown by 2 turns every time someone else uses a special, and he has one of the best supports in the game. Definitely a must. Get this guy done if you have V1 Rayleigh. Super awaken him because he is aged like goddamn fine wine. Lucci, don't even bother. He's trash. Powerhouse is great, but he's trash. He's good when he first came out though. This Shanks, honestly, like, isn't overly useful, but with Sai being so good, you can hybrid him up. But it's just better options. In PvP though, he is actually quite decent. On a side team, he can do a lot of things. He does like a 23% HP cut in the last 30 seconds of the battle, and then does 2,350 damage to all enemies and reduces their defense by 7 turns. So you could put him on a PvP team, but otherwise, if you're not using him on PvP, like, just don't bother. Kuzan, definitely PvP worthy. Kuzan's great on striker and shooter teams. He is exceptional as he does that action bind ability. Oh my god, can you just like stay there, please? I hate this about the tier list. There we go. He's great on shooter and striker teams because he has that action bind effect. He's special in regular player, unfortunately. He does that extend buff, which it's just trash. Honestly, I don't like that buff at all. 2.5 times chain lock and 100,000 fixed damage. Pretty decent, the fixed damage, but otherwise, if you're not using this guy in PvP, like, there's no reason to super awaken him. Same with Ace. Ace is amazing on free spirit and shooter teams in PvP. He does cut his own HP, but then he does like a butt ton of damage. And when I say a butt ton of damage, I mean like a butt ton of damage. He's great at like, he was actually like a bit of a nuker to take down the Rodin combo, like back when Rodin first came out. And if you're looking for like a decent unit in Rumble, Ace can be your guy. Sengoku, do not bother. I recently used 6-star Sengoku, and he's just doo-doo. Hody actually gets a pretty solid buff, to be honest. And if you're looking for a good speed farming captain, Hody can be your guy. But there are better characters that can do that, like with like Treasure Map Zoro and Enel and stuff like that. And besides that, he isn't overly useful. I do see him having a resurgence on Japan, though, as that new Blackbeard that came out with the defensive effects, Hody can give it 2 times attack boost instead of giving the damage reduction. So he may see a resurgence, but he isn't overly useful, to be honest. But in the same sense, he does get better than his 6-star, and you can use him for speed farming. Mihawk's the same, isn't overly useful. His special's quite good, going to up to a 60% times the damage, but you can get away with just using V1 Mihawk regardless, because he's just so niche that you can just use the regular one. Zoro, again, isn't very useful. Slashes are very, very good, but they don't really have a meta, unfortunately. 2.5 times chain lock, I'm pretty sure, 2.75 times chain lock, and a 1.75 times attack boost as a sub, or a 2 times attack boost as a captain. You're never using this guy as a captain, but as a sub, you could probably argue that he could still see play. Law gets a solid buff. He turns into a cerebral unit. Starts as a striker, turns into a cerebral. Cerebrals are great. He's a 2.25 times orb boost, which is still fairly solid. Reduces barriers by 1 turn, 200,000 fixed damage. He also has an insane support for Corazon. Gives a 1.75 times rainbow orb boost on Corazon when Corazon uses a special. Very, very strong. Croc, don't even bother. There's nothing good to say about Croc. Once upon a time, I really liked Croc, but he's a low HP captain. Cerebrals are great, but Croc's not. Bardo, don't bother. Driven and Striker. I really love this Bardo. He has a fantastic support, but regular Bardo has the same support, so don't even worry about it. This Law isn't overly useful. He can be useful, though, and he does get a pretty solid buff compared to his original, but he's so niche. He's very similar to Mihawk. I would put him next to Mihawk in terms of usability, as you don't really need that going through defensive effect stuff. And when you do, there's just other ways around it, just better ways around it. Kizaru, if this was a Rumble tier list, he's a must. But, unfortunately, it's an overall tier list, so we're going to put him in PvP worthy. This guy in PvP is nuts. He pops his special up every 15 seconds or something silly. He does attack up level 7 to slashers and shooters for 29 seconds, and you can just 24 I think it is actually, and you can just stack that. He just pops off so goddamn much. If you're running slashers and shooters, you want this guy on the team somewhere. You have to have him on the team. Buggy's a must. April Fool's, lol joke, don't bother. Don't even bother. Buggy, the reason you run Buggy is for getting the double dupe, the dupe treasure drops, and just regular Buggy does the same thing, so don't bother. And whoever limit break keys Buggy, just why? Jinbe's a must. 5 turns of defense up, 5 turns of damage reduction, immune to special blind. This guy is god tier. Absolutely amazing. 150 coins at the moment. I'd pick him up if you have the coins, but make sure you have enough for another unit we're going to talk about in a second, who goes by the name of Corazon. Judge, don't even bother. 6-star Judge is just way better. 7 turns of bind removal and an orb boost compared to a 2 times attack boost for Powerhouse and Driven. I tried using this Judge recently, and just the 6-star Judge is better. If you have 2, you could probably argue he isn't very useful, but he's still he's still useful. But if you've only got 1, don't bother. Just keep the regular side Judge. This guy was meta for a little bit with the Germas, but other than that, you don't use him. There's just better Judges. Magellan, he's got to go in, isn't overly useful. His captain ability is great for zombie teams, and he does actually get a pretty solid buff. But I just hate running zombie teams, man. They hurt my head. They actually hurt my head. If you can get his toxic off, though, he is very, very good. He's a great healer for the team. Does damage over time, obviously. And actually, honestly, he's probably PvP worthy. If you're running a Dex defensive team, he's very, very good as he does damage over time. So you could probably argue he's PvP worthy, but overall, he's definitely not very useful. For the sake of it, though, because PvP is a pretty big part of the game, we will slap him in PvP worthy. My boy Corazon. This was my second legend, man, and I've loved this unit ever since. 3 turns of every debuff removal in the game, basically. What is it? Blind, Despair, Paralysis, Chain Lock, Attack Down, Chain Coefficient Reduction, heals 50 times his HP. He has 2 amazing Sailors of Paralysis and Special Blind removal for your crew. He has one of the best supports in the game for Law. Just Pick him up for 150 coins when he comes out, guys, because, like, this guy's amazing. Super Awaken him, Limit Break plus him, he gets, like, 4 turns of cooldown. Like, very, very good unit. Amazing, amazing unit. I cannot stress that enough. Enel, do not bother. Just, the enemies have too much HP nowadays for him to be viable. 5 million damage is just not that great anymore. When you're versing a boss that's 40 million HP, 5 million just looks like nothing. So, don't bother with Enel. You have to unlock his skulls as well. Same with Judge. Like, if you have to unlock their skulls, you're using a gem on a character you're basically never going to use unless it's like treasure map. Sanji. Honestly, Sanji isn't overly useful. His sky jump mechanic is really cool. I really like the sky jump mechanic, but like Sobermask does it better. So, he's not very useful. He's got a good support, but regular Sanji has the same support, so it is what it is. Frankie gets a solid buff. I really like this Frankie. A lot of people don't, but that general Frankie form is actually really good, similar to the Big Father effect, because you can't have characters blown away. He's a 2x attack boost for his team as well, which is great as a captain. 2.25 if there's multiple enemies, by the way. Downside to him is you have to have fighter, shooter, striker, or slasher units, the tag somewhere in the character. And if you don't, like, you just lose all the damage. But that doesn't change from his 6-star form. He has a good support as well, 1.4x attack to the Straw Hats, I'm pretty sure, if they use a damage dealing special. So, like, he gets a solid buff, to be honest. Fortunately, you do need to unlock his skulls, but compared to Sanji, like, this Frankie, honestly, for me, just aged way better. Mr. Hakuba, or Cavendish, don't bother. Don't bother. He's only used as a support, and Cavendish has the same support, so just don't bother. Dogstorm, PvP worthy. He's very good as a slasher, sort of, like, ult. He can do a lot of damage. Unfortunately, he cuts his own HP, but he's very similar to this Ace, to be honest, for slashes. The problem with Dogstorm is he just boosts... Oh my god, can you just go there, please? And you go... Yeah, we'll leave it like that. The problem with Dogstorm is he only boosts Cerebrals, he doesn't boost slashes, but he can find a spot on the slasher team because he just does so much damage, you can let him die and then have your sub come in. Ace is probably a little bit better, in my opinion, but Dogstorm... He can be PvP worthy. Otherwise, if you're not using him PvP, just don't bother. Like, he's not good. Mr. Nekomamushi. Nekomamushi does get a solid buff. His captain ability, his damage doesn't change too much, but he gets utility. He gets, like, burn and attack down removal. You're mainly using this guy as a sub, though, so I am going to put him in isn't overly useful, as he doesn't really have that great of a PvP ability or anything like that. And strikers are just, they're a little bit doo-doo, to be honest. Like, they got some good units, but, like, they're like slashers, to be honest. Like, slashers have some, like, OP units. Well, they're not like slashers. Like, slashers are way better, but, they sort of fall in the same sort of category as, they have a lot of good units, they just don't have a very, very solid leader. Lucci. Lucci gets a solid buff, mainly because he turns into a shooter unit. 2x color affinity is nothing to shrug at. And he drastically reduces defense as well as giving paralysis removal. So he actually gets a very solid buff. The downside to this guy is shooters suck. Like, let's be real. Unless you're running Ace on Japan, shooters suck. They do. But in PvP, this guy's a god. He's really, really good. He does defense reduction level 7. I'm pretty sure that he does a butt ton of damage as well, doesn't he? He does 1.5 times his attack to a medium range, and defense down level 7, which is crazy. His rumble ability is only for shooters, though. That's his big downside. But shooters, they do find a spot in rumble, as shooters are pretty good. Speed up level 7. When hitting a crit, he gives up attack up level 5. So he is PvP worthy. But if you are running shooters for God knows what reason, you could run Frankie as your shooter captain, to be honest. He does get a pretty solid buff. For the meantime, though, where I see him most is either using him as a support or in PvP, so we're going to put him in PvP worthy. OG Snakeman. Definitely must. If you have Tankman, get this guy done. He's a Rainbow Captain, 4.25 after you use his special. 1.75 times Orb Boost carried into a 2 times if you hit 3 perfects. Boost the chain multiplied by 0.7 for 3 turns, so you can carry that into another room. And if he's a captain, makes every color matching. I don't know what else you want in a unit, to be honest. This guy's what, like 2-3 years old now? No, not 3 years. Is he 3? No, is he 3 years? I think he's about 2 and a bit years old, and he is still, like, a captain. Like, just, I don't know what else to say about this unit. He's a must-do. And he can actually, like, be hybrid up with just so many good units. Like, so many good units. This Boa actually gets a pretty solid buff. she was a shooter and then becomes free spirit. That's the big thing about her. She becomes a free spirit. Unfortunately, though, she is a color affinity booster. She's a 2x color affinity booster, which is great, but running her as a captain is just pointless. And there's other characters that can just do 2x color affinity boosters. So I'm going to put her in isn't overly useful, mainly because, like, she's kind of like Neko, right? Like, they're good units, but, like, you just don't use them that much. And, like, when a rare recruit can do what they do better, or, like, if not better, and you don't have to waste your time farming skulls, especially because you have to unlock her skulls, it is what it is. Mr. Doflamingo, if this was a PvP tier list, you would be the top. Like, if this was a PvP tier list, he would be up here. Like up near the stump sign. But it's not. So we're going to put him in PvP worthy. If you're running Driven, if you're running Int, if you're running Slasher, get this guy done. The downside to this guy is getting his skulls is so annoying. You have to get them through treasure maps. So all you treasure map haters, get on your bike, mate, because you've got to start the grind. This guy is a god in Rumble. An absolute god. Slasher driven teammates, HP up level 6, and for the first 30 seconds, gives them defense up level 3 and attack up level 6. Amazing Rumble unit. He's special. 3 units take 2 times his attack in damage, and then slashers and drivens get defense up level 5 and crit percent up level 6. 27-second cooldown. You don't need much else in a Rumble unit. When you super awaken him too, he actually becomes a driven booster, not a rainbow booster. So that actually kind of hinders him a little bit, but he does get us some very good support for driven units as well. So I would put him in sort of solid buff for overall play, but for this tier list, he has to go in PvP worthy. The solid buff and PvP worthy tier list like levels are sort of like the same. It's kind of like up to you depending on what you have. If you're like missing sort of rare recruits that can't do the same things as these guys, that's where I would sort of argue PvP and solid buff are sort of the same. Must obviously be in the top. Big Mom, don't even worry about Big Mom. She got a buff, but like it's just Big Mom. The rampage ability is just so finicky, so just don't worry about her. Just move on. V2 Fuji, don't even bother. Like, I think he's a slasher leader. I guess slashers are good, but like, yeah, he is. But like, you have to hit good, great, perfects. Shout out to the good, great, perfect boys. Which kind of sucks because he's only a 3.25 times attack boost. He doesn't really gain much. His support stays the same, which is fairly useful, I guess. But he's special. Does a 2.75 times chain lock. That's the buff he gets, but you have to be captain to get that. So just don't bother. Just run Roger. Like, Roger's a better slasher leader, right? Akainu, Mr. Sakazuki. He gets a solid buff. Now, this guy's a bit controversial, and the reason I'm going to put him in solid buff is because strength is so strong. Shout out to my super type Sabo lovers. But the big reason for this guy getting a solid buff is his original form was sort of built around Rainbow or being above 50 cost. That was the big thing with Sakazuki. Now what they've done is they've just focused on strength, which is what you ideally wanted or optimally wanted to run with him. He deals massive damage, double strength characters, and changes all slots to strength. And as a captain, if you have a strength slot, he goes from a 3.25 booster up to like a 4 point something times booster as he adds the 1.3. I'm not 100% sure on the math, but it definitely goes around that 4 times multiplier. You can hybrid him up with like super type Sabo, hybrid him up with like super type Luffy, Odin, like the Sweet 3, like there's a lot of stuff you can do with this guy, and he has an amazing support. Any strength character that does damage, you get a 1.5 times attack boost to strength and a full board of strength slot. So, very good unit, to be honest. He's Asian like fine wine, this boy. Miss Nami. Miss Nami's going to get a solid buff for me. I love this Nami, to be honest. She keeps the ability to get a double slot effect as well as color affinity for free spirit driven cerebral and powerhouse, which kind of sucks a little bit, but she loses the fact that your captain has to be that. That's the big thing. You can still use her as long as your captain, like the OG one, your captain had to be that. She's sort of built around Tank Man. But now she also has 3 turns of paralysis and burn removal, which is pretty handy, to be honest. Unfortunately, she's a Dex captain, so you're never going to use her as a captain, but she does get a pretty solid buff. Miss Shirahoshi. Miss Shirahoshi honestly isn't overly useful, but at the same time, she does get a solid buff. She removes the recovery bind and recovery lock by 15 turns on her second stage of the special. And then she does 125 times recovery and changes all slots into rainbow slots. Honestly, I don't use her that much, but where you can, like, there's a lot of times where you can, like, I can use her. I just don't really, like, my playstyle doesn't really fit Shirahoshi. But in terms of her buff, it's a pretty solid buff. She has a very good support for Luffy. That doesn't change when you super awaken her. But it is a bit of solid buff nonetheless, and she sort of does something that not a lot of other units can do. So I do want to put her in solid buff for that. The big dog bullet. Definitely a must. 100% a must. If there's any character on this list you should limit break plus, besides maybe Corazon and Rayleigh, this guy is the one you want to do. He is bonkers. Reduces all enemies' HP by 20% and then deals 2 times the damage he deals in that turn to all enemies for 2 turns. And his captain ability gives him a 4.75 times attack boost, makes strength, quick, and int characters slots have matching slot effects. He's a 4 times captains for his subs, and he's super effective against all types. So you can imagine how much damage that 2 times damage is doing. You can hybrid him up with Kaido, but unfortunately you can't stack the damage of Kaido with Bullet. So there is that. Kind of sucks. I was a bit of a spoon and said that you could, so apologies to the GGP boys, but look, it is what it is. So yeah, make sure you do Bullet. Make sure you get Bullet done. So yeah, Katakuri. Honestly, Katakuri's a must for me. This character, honestly, he gets a solid buff. He does get a solid buff. He completely changes. It makes him just way better, but he is so much fun. Like, honestly, he's so much fun. And if you're struggling for int characters, he's actually a must. He gets 100 times his attack in tap timing bonuses, changes block slots to characters' own types, makes slasher, striker, driven, and cerebral powerhouse character slot effects matching for 2 turns. And if you land 3 perfects, he doubles damage to delayed enemies from the next turn. And with his captain ability, having that guaranteed delay if you do over 2 million damage, which is very easy to do with your tap timing. If you're running Slasher, Striker, Drivens, you get like a 3.8 times multiplier as well. He makes Strength, Psi, Recovery, T&D, or have matching slot effects, and he reduces damage by 20%. This guy is literally what V1 Katakuri should have been when he first came out. So they did him a lot of justice by giving him the 6+. And for me, he's a must. Like, he's so much fun to use. And he can clear content. He changes the way that you play, and in a good way, which is just, he's a lot of fun. Like, a lot of fun. Lucci. Lucci gets a solid buff. He's not essential to Awaken. The big reason that he gets a solid buff is he gains the free spirit tag, and he reduces special charge by 1 turn on his special. His special does the same thing, strength, dex, and quick. He does turn into a quick unit over a strength unit as well, which honestly kind of sucks because strength is just a better color. But as a captain, he reduces the special charge by 1 turn at the start of the fight, and if there are no Psi or in characters, he can do up to an extra 1.4 times attack on top of the 2.75 he does. So still very, very decent. He has a very good support, but that doesn't change from Super Awakening him. The reason he's going in solid buff is because he gains free spirit. Like, that's the buff he really gains, the free spirit tag. Robin isn't overly useful, unfortunately. She does get a actually solid buff, to be honest. But the buff that she does get is she becomes a 2 times attack booster for cerebrals. And there's just characters that can literally do that better. So for me, she isn't overly useful, as the big reason that you were using Robin was to get that nullified damage. Robin, can you just stay there for me, girl? Can you just please? Yeah, the main reason that you were using Robin was because, oh my god, how do I suck at doing this so much? There we go. The big reason you were using Robin was to get the nullified damage for 1 turn, which is what the original Robin does. So the 6+ isn't overly useful, but gaining that 2 times attack to cerebrals is, like, it can be useful. So I'm going to put her in isn't overly useful. If you are a big Robin fan and you want to put her in solid buff, I can't disagree with that. But in terms of wasting your time and your materials on that character, I would only do it when the situation arises. And normally there's another way around it. Marco. Let's have a look at what Marco does. Honestly, I got to, like, sort of remember what some of these units do. Marco actually has a pretty solid support. I don't know if he gains that from the Super Awakening, but he does double slots for 1 turn. Instead of doing the 1.5 times slot boost, he does double them. Now I remember. He does still do that crazy heal, and he's actually a pretty solid captain for quick and Psi, as if your HP is full, he's a 4 times attack boost, and if your crew's HP is 70% or below, he does a 3.5 times attack boost, but reduces damage by 30%. So fairly decent buff. Unfortunately, like, you still don't really use him that much, but if you need a really big healer on the team and don't need utility, getting that 2 times orb boost can actually be very, very strong compared to that cheeky little 1.5 that he used to give. So I'm going to put him in solid buff. Mainly because he's a Marco unit too, which means you can use like the Whitebeard support, so he's pretty good. Quickbeard. Mr. Quickbeard. Mr. Quickbeard, he gets a pretty solid buff, to be honest. He's a powerhouse captain, which is great. He gains burn and despair removal by 4 turns, just flat rate, which is great. He boosts the chain multiplier by 0.7 and doubles Powerhouse Striker's attack for 1 turn. That doesn't change from his original form, but if your HP is 50% or below, he reduces damage by 95% and additionally reduces another 20 turns of despair. That 20 turn despair is no joke. Like, that can be very, very handy as a sub, as well as having a very, very good support to removing despair by 3 turns on Ace and Marco. His captain ability, though, gets such a big buff. Reduces special charge by 1 turn, which is the same. Boost Powerhouse and Striker character's attack. The lower your HP is up to 4.5 at 1 HP. And reduces damage by 20%, but sets all recovery to 0. This guy is a monster. The big thing about this guy is he starts at a 3.25 times captain at max HP. So with the Whitebeard ship, you can start at like a 3.75 flat rate captain for strikers and powerhouse. The downside to this guy is there is a character called Kaido running around. And Kaido, just if you're running powerhouse strikers, Kaido normally does it better, but you can easily hybrid this guy. He does get a solid buff because powerhouses are so strong. But in saying that, if you have Kaido, you're normally just running Kaido. But nevertheless, he does get a pretty solid buff. V1 Fuji. V1 Fuji is going to go into PvP worthy for me. If you're running driven and int-based teams, like the OG Katakuri and Blackbeard team, this guy can actually be really, really good in Rumble. His special does a 59% HP cut on all enemies on a 36 turn cooldown, and his ability gives HP for driven up level 8. So, in regular play, he absolutely do, like, don't even bother, but if you are using him in Rumble, something to look at would be to Limit Break Plus this, not Limit Break Plus, Super Awaken this guy, just for the extra stats, as he can be very, very useful. Next, we got our boy, Garpy Boy. Garp, honestly, for me, is a must. Like, he doesn't, come on. He doesn't really gain all that much, but he's just so goddamn useful that, for me, he is a must. Reduces enemies' HP by 30% that ignores all defensive effects, sets the chain multiplier by 3.25, and reduces crew's special blind by 7 turns. 7 turns is massive, as he actually is immune to special blind by 20 turns. I don't know why he's just not immune to it altogether, but it is what it is. His captain ability gets an insane buff as well. He goes from, I think it's up to like a 4 times captain if you hit good, great, perfect, to a 4.5 times captain, and starts as a 3 times multiplier with a 1.5 times HP boost. He also makes sight, int, and recovery always matching. This guy as a sub is insane. He's got one of the best supports in the game as well. Unfortunately, he doesn't attach to very many units, Kobe, Helmeppo, and Kuzan, but he removes special bind by 3 turns for your entire crew, which is just gnarly, man. If you're running Kobe, Helmeppo, or if you're running like Kuzan, usually I just slap this guy on just in case. So, very, very strong unit, and I would definitely 6+ him, but the essentialness to rock him as a captain isn't overly massive. But as a sub, I do use this guy quite a bit, and I would put him in must, or at minimum, in solid buff. Like, you could probably argue the same thing with Katakuri as terms of solid buff, but Katakuri is just so fun. Like, he's so fun. But for me, like, just to sort of bulk out the must tier as well, for me, like, Garp is way more important than doing any other of these other solid buff units. For me, anyway. Next, we got Rayleigh. Rayleigh doesn't change all that much, but in PvP, he changes massively. This guy is a god on rainbow teams. If you're running a rainbow PvP team, you need this guy on the team. He's special. Unfortunately, he's on a 45 turn cooldown, which sort of sucks, but he does 1,700 damage to a large range, gives attack up level 5 and defense up level 5, and then if he takes damage, he does base level 5 HP up, and if you get below 60% HP on himself, he gives level 5 defense up and level 5 guard up, which is absolutely massive. The amount of damage that you guys can tank from that is incredibly strong, like incredibly strong. And having him on a defensive team or on a rainbow team is just absolutely god tier. One of the best rumble units of the game, actually. Our boy Jinbe. Mr. Jinbe. Honestly, he's not very useful. He does give, like, what, a 2.25 times attack boost to 3 separate colors, strength, I think it's strength, what is it? Strength, Psi, and Dex. And he can be a 4x captain, but to get the most out of this guy, you need to have every single... Oh, excuse me. You have to have every single orb, which does sort of suck, to be honest. Like, and it's just... It is what it is. He's not very useful. Doesn't change all that much from his original form, so I'm going to leave him in the isn't overly useful tier. Big Daddy Capone. Big Daddy Capone gets a solid buff, man. He becomes driven as well, which is just incredible. Honestly, oh my god. I know I've been raving on about the fact that driven isn't overly great, and I would love for you to go at the start. Thank you very much, Mr. Capone. And I know I've been raving on about how shooters suck as well, but gaining the driven tag is amazing for like Katakuri and Blackbeard. The super typings of Katakuri especially, this guy becomes his best friend. Doubles the attack, which sort of not great for Katakuri because Katakuri already does that. But it becomes the Big Father effect. The Big Father effect drops your HP by 80%. And, or 85% I should say, sorry. And then with that, it triggers Katakuri's super typing as well as the 5x captain. So, very, very solid unit, and I would definitely get him done if you are a big fan of running super type Katakuri. And he's amazing for Kazuna as well to just guarantee that you can get around blowaway effects as the Big Father. You can get healing with his captain ability. He becomes a 4x captain for shooter and driven. Sign in orbs are matching. He's very, very strong, and I would definitely get him done, to be honest. I would honestly like argue that he could be up here in the must tier, but talking realistically, if this was not my tier list, it would probably look something like that. To be honest, like that's ideally what it would look like. But these two characters here, Garp and Katakuri, I feel like they would be in some sort of middle tier. So for me, like I wanna put them in must like so bad. So we're gonna leave it like that, but it is what it is. On to the next characters now. These characters are only on Japan. So. Oh, excuse me. So, the first one we're going to talk about is Blackbeard. Blackbeard is going to be the next character that comes out on OPTC Global. So, let's talk about him first. I used to love this Blackbeard. I used to adore this Blackbeard. Partnering him up with the OG Akainu is very, very good. So, his base captain is a 3.75 and HP 1.5 to striker, shooter, fighter, and slashes. And he ignores all barriers and buffs, which is very, very good. He does have a limit break key that puts him as a 4x captain. So there is that, but it also, wait, can you use defensive effects with the 6+? It looks like you can. It doesn't say anything about like the fact that you can't use defensive effects. They're still affected by the base defense though, and enemy attacks will go through your defensive buffs. Okay, so he still keeps that defensive buff stuff. His special cuts HP by 30%, which ignores all negating abilities, and he reduces bind by 5 turns and changes block orbs into matching. Unfortunately, he's on an 18 turn cooldown, 14 with limit break expansion, but honestly, you know, it's not overly worth it. If Blackbeard's not the captain, his special will be affected by barriers, so that kind of sucks a little bit too much. But the extra utility with the block orb manipulation is quite nice. So I guess he's not too bad, but as well in saying that, he's still not that good. So I'm going to put him in isn't overly useful. You could run him as a hybrid captain to get through those barriers and stuff, but with Carrot being a thing and yeah, it's just... Look, it is what it is. I mean, you could say he gets a solid buff just from utility-wise, but even still, like, I just don't really see you using this Blackbeard with such a high cooldown as well. So I'm going to say isn't overly useful, but if you do want to argue to me that he's in solid buff, like, I mean, I really can't discredit that too much either. Let's have a look at the next unit now. We've got our boy V2 Zoro. V2 Zoro. Let's have a look at our V2 Zoro. What does he get? Alright, so he gets attack of slashes by 3.25, HP by 1.5, and if the character has a dex or in orb, he's at 4.2225. That's weird. He's special 200 times attack in typeless damage to all enemies, makes recovery and TND orbs have matching of flood effects 3 turns, and boosts the character's slashes by 2.25 for 1 turn, and if you hit 3 perfects, you get a 2.25 in the following turn. That's really not that bad, to be honest. On a 14 turn cooldown with limit break expansion, he's not too bad. He has silence removal by 10 turns as well. That's pretty interesting. I don't know why he has silence resistance. He doesn't do anything to do with special one removal. But this Zoro, he doesn't really gain too much of a buff from his original form. The original form still had that carryover effect, right? His Rumble special is just, you're really not using this guy in Rumble, to be honest. He does have to be farmed up with skulls, like his own skulls, which is a thing as well. That is something to note. But his original special, I mean, he still has the same 4 point... Oh, no, that's with his Limit Break expansion. Okay. Right. Yeah, look, he doesn't get that much of a buff. Wait, does it go from 4... So you go from 4 hits to 3 hits with the carryover effect. With his regular limit break, well, with his limit break expansion, he goes up to a 4.55, so that's pretty decent. And he goes to 3 perfect hits instead of 4 perfect hits. That's really the big change. Honestly, he isn't overly useful. You could argue like he does get a pretty solid buff, but at the same time, he still gets that like 2 times. The big thing is that carryover effect, which doesn't really change. You just get more damage, and you could just use Roger, to be honest. Roger's going to like blow away the negating effects if they do have like an interrupt for an attack booster, so just be mindful of that as well. Next, we've got Sanji, the 6+ of the fighter Sanji. Now, I hate this unit. Like, this unit sucks, man. Like, when he first came out, he was alright, but like nowadays, he's just like mad doo-doo. Alright, so he boosts, if there are only fighter characters, so he keeps that kind of sucks. He reduces all cooldowns by 1, which is quite nice. Boosts the chain multiplier by 4 times, and their attack by 1.75 times, and HP by 1.2. Boosts the chance of landing on matching orbs proportional to the current crew's HP. So, at 1 HP, it's higher, and at full HP, it's lower. So, that sucks. Being at low HP, not a fun time. His special does 250 times attack and side damage to one enemy and boosts attack of fighter characters by 2.25 for 2 turns. And if the captain is fighter, he reduces the chain multiplier and chain coefficient reduction by 10 turns. Now, that is actually pretty good. The fact that he goes from the captain being a fighter character, not just him being the captain to remove the chain coefficient reduction, is actually pretty useful, mainly for the chain lock reduction. The chain lock reduction is the big one, as like getting around chain coefficient reduction is easy. The chain lock reduction isn't. Yeah, so that's actually a pretty big buff. Now the downside to him still is he boosts fighters, right? Fighters aren't overly that great, but there are a lot of very good characters that have the fighter tag. If we look up here, we've got Bullet, for example. I'm pretty sure Garp. No, Garp's Free Spirit Powerhouse. I'm thinking of like Luffy Sanji. You can't use him with Luffy Sanji. Dope. For that, honestly, I'm going to put him in solid buff, because like that is actually a pretty decent buff. The fact that you don't have to run him as captain. I mean, chain lock captains aren't my favorite thing in the world to rock, and you're about to see that with Mihawk as well, but that buff, 2.25 to fighters, is still pretty strong as well, and it's an attack boost, which is great, but the fact that just your captain has to be fighter, you can actually see play with that like fairly easily, to be honest, like fairly easily. You don't have to be running fighter teams, you just need to have that fighter tag, which honestly to me is actually pretty solid. Alright, let's go back to the database and let's have a look at Mihawk now. Alright, Mihawk, what do you got for me, homie? Let's have a look. He is also a chain locking captain, which I don't like. He's the same as Sanji. You have to have only slashes on the crew if he's a captain. 4 times, 1.75 times attack boost. Boost the chance of getting dex and in orbs and reduces damage by 10%. So he's made to be used obviously with Zoro. The hybrid of those two is meant to be the thing, but look, it is what it is. If current HP cuts HP of one enemy by 25%, which ignores all negating abilities and barriers, and then he's a 2.25 times orb boost, and if your crew has 3 or more dex or int orbs, locks the orbs for 1 turn, and after 1 turn amplifies the orbs for slasher characters by 2.25. Now, I'm assuming the after 1 turn is that sort of like that timer buff. Now, if you run these two characters together, the Mihawk and the Zoro, they can do some pretty wild things, but I don't like chain locking captains that can be negated very, very easily, and he doesn't have a way of removing that like Sanji does. And there's just better units, like using Odin's was way better, like use Roger as a slasher captain, it's just way better. So they're not overly useful, but they do get a solid buff, to be honest. The fact that you can get the 2.25 attack, the 2.25 times orb over 2 rooms, very similar to using the Halloween slashes. You can easily do that with a slasher team. The downside is if you're using like the Halloween slashes, you're not using this Mihawk, obviously, because you're using Halloween Mihawk. And Roger and Odin, I'm sorry, they do it better. Like, it is what it is, right? But I guess you could argue they get a solid buff, but at the same time, I think the Mihawk gets a bit of a better buff than the Zoro, but it is what it is, right? It is what it is. Alright, let's wrap this video up with our girl, Nami. Where's our girl, Nami? The newest Super Evolution that just came out on JP. She gets an insane buff from memory. An insane buff. Her captain ability reduces cooldown by 2 turns. Oh, that's so good. Boosts attack of all characters by 3.5 compared to Intense Quick, which is great. Recovers 0.5 recovery at the end of each time if you hit a perfect. And if the crew has 4 or more characters of the same type, boosts attack of the dominant type's character's attack by 4 times and boosts the color affinity of that dominant type by 1.1. That is actually really good. She is a quick unit. She's very similar to V2 Shanks. V2 Shanks was just incredible. He was so underrated. So this chick here gets immediately I'm putting her in solid boost. Her special, Lightning Blast, does 150,000 fixed damage to all enemies and reduces special cooldown by 1 turn. If the crew has 4 characters of the same type, boosts color affinity by 1.75. If your HP is above 99% when the special is activated, removes enemies' defense reduction completely and reduces defense by 100% for 2 turns, and then doubles the attack against enemies with defense down for 2 turns. Otherwise, she recovers 50% of the crew's maximum HP and does the same thing for 1 turn instead. So she still has that. Fortunately, she still is nerfed by the immunity to everything debuff, but being like a massive 4 times captain as well as the color affinity buff as well, honestly, if you're using this Nami, she is she's a must. Like Super Awakening, she's really, really, really good. I think the downside is she loses her art. That's the big downside to this unit, but the color affinity, like the conditional boost, she still has that amazing support. Honestly, for me, she's a must. Like, she is really, really, really strong. But there you guys go. That is going to wrap up my tier list today. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure to go down there and belt the like button for me. And if you are new to my channel, consider hitting that big red subscribe button too. But guys, wherever you are in this beautiful world, make sure to enjoy the rest of your day. As always, I thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one. Lights!